Welcome, everyone. Get ready, because today we are embarking on a deep dive cultural documentary experience. We're going to visually deconstruct exactly how technological evolution, socioeconomic decay, and ancient traditions totally collided to create a global powerhouse. We're talking about the genesis of hip-hop. But, we aren't just going to look at it as a genre of music. We're going to examine it as a highly complex socio-historical phenomenon. It's like a giant, fascinating puzzle, and we are going to put the pieces together.
To truly understand what makes this culture so incredibly unique, we have to start by completely shattering a myth. Sociologists Gabriele Klein and Malte Friedrich define pop culture as a short-lived but intense pure moment. And honestly, almost every youth culture out there, from punk to techno, fits that mold, right? They burn bright and then they fade out into niche subcultures. But hip-hop? It completely defies that standard definition. It literally refuses to die. It's dominated the global stage for over 3 decades now. And what's even more fascinating is the absolute irony of its survival. It's been co-opted by the very corporate giants it historically rebelled against. A perfect example, the German railway company Deutsche Bahn. So they spend astronomical amounts of money every single year fighting graffiti artists with border police. Yet, ironically, they released a hip-hop compilation CD to market themselves, actively featuring the very graffiti culture they spend millions trying to erase. You really can't make this stuff up.
Okay, let's dive into this agenda. We've just touched on the paradox of pop culture. Next, we'll unpack the music industry and the disco backlash, the actual invention of the breakbeat, the wild journey from ancient griots to modern rap battles, breakdance and graffiti, and finally, just how deeply rooted this culture truly is.
Now, right up front, I want to establish that our explainer today is grounded in a really rigorous master's thesis by Thomas Weber from the Heinrich Heine University Dusseldorf. He used this heavy-duty methodology called cognitive hermeneutics. I bring this up because for a long time, traditional scholars kind of turned their noses up at this topic. But today, the study of this culture is recognized at the highest academic levels. I mean, there's even a dedicated hip-hop archive at Harvard University. So we are definitely looking at this through a highly analytical lens.
To actually grasp the sounds of the Bronx in the 1970s, we've got to step all the way back to the 19th century. Sound reproduction started with Edison's gramophone. Then, by the mid-20th century, tape recorders made audio flexible, meaning you could erase and record right over it. By the 1960s, advances in final records and studio tech introduced overdubbing and synthetic sound generation. Think of the Beatles' 1967 album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That album was a real game changer. It proved that music was no longer just a recording of a live event, music was malleable. It was literally a physical material that you could cut, layer, and manipulate. And this technological evolution laid the absolute technical groundwork for everything that was about to explode in the Bronx. Picture the 1970s music scene. It was an incredible juxtaposition. Over on one side, you had disco. Following the civil rights movement, record labels saw this massive opportunity for crossover marketing. They took black music, slickly produced and homogenized it to appeal to a broad, mostly white, middle-class audience. It was highly corporate, totally polished, and driven 100% by profit margins. But on the other side, you had the exact opposite. Down in the desolate, impoverished, socioeconomically decaying neighborhoods of the South Bronx, music was happening purely on a local level. Totally unaffected by the expectations of the massive music industry, youth were out there building their own DIY mobile sound systems to throw neighborhood parties. Well, by 1979, the corporate gloss of disco had really worn thin. Artists were sick of being forced into this disco mold by record executives, and a massive cultural backlash began, famously summed up by the slogan, "Disco sucks." But right as disco was dying, something incredibly ironic happened. The very first commercially successful rap hit dropped, Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. But get this, the Sugar Hill Gang was essentially a manufactured group created by label owner Sylvia Robinson, who wasn't even part of the Bronx underground scene. And the musical backing for Rapper's Delight? It was literally a direct sample of Chic's massive disco anthem, Good Times. The underground had suddenly breached the mainstream, riding in on the exact genre it was supposedly rebelling against.
Section 1. The birth of the breakbeat and the absolute legend, Kool DJ Herc.
Let's leave those corporate record labels in the dust and go back to where it all actually started. The streets of the Bronx in 1973. Hip-hop started entirely as a DJ culture, and the undisputed pioneer is Kool DJ Herc. Drawing on the traditions of his native Jamaica,
Herc built these massive portable sound systems. Because they didn't have access to proper clubs, they threw block parties in parks and schoolyards. And they were literally tapping into local street lamps, illegally by the way, just to draw enough power to run their massive speakers. It was at these block parties that Herc noticed something fascinating. The crowds didn't dance equally to the whole song. No, they waited for the break, that short, raw, instrumental percussion section of a funk or soul record, and they went completely wild. So, Herc engineered a brilliant, simple solution. Step 1. He put 2 identical records on 2 separate turntables. Step 2. He'd play the break on record A. Step 3. Just as the break on record A finished, boom, he'd play the exact same break on record B. While B was playing, he would physically spin record A backward, a technique called backspinning, to cue it up all over again. By bouncing back and forth, he could loop a 5-second break into a 10-minute continuous groove. He essentially invented the breakbeat, and that became the defining sonic architecture of the entire culture.
So while Herc laid the foundation, it was DJs like Grandmaster Flash who elevated turntablism into a spectacular performance art. Flash didn't just mix, he entertained. He scratched the vinyl, he mixed behind his back, he basically used his turntables like a lead guitar. I absolutely love this quote from him. He said, "I played the Pink Panther, or I played Honky Tonk Woman by the Rolling Stones and just let the beat run. I had fun mocking people who announced things like, I don't like rock. Then I'd play Mick Jagger and the Black and Hispanic kids would literally lose it, dancing like crazy. I'd say, I thought you didn't like rock, and they'd say, are you kidding me?" That story just perfectly captures the boundary-breaking, eclectic genius of early hip-hop. They took existing music, completely deconstructed it, and totally recontextualized it for their own crowd.
Moving on to Section 2, the evolution of rap, from necessity to ancestry.
Okay, so we have the DJ and we have the breakbeat, but how did rapping, or MCing, actually come into the picture? Well, it started out of pure necessity. Grandmaster Flash actually noted that as his DJ skills got more and more complex, the crowd stopped dancing. They would crowd around the turntables and just stare at his hands, as he put it, like a seminar. Obviously, at a high-energy party, that is the very last thing you want. The DJs quickly realized they needed vocals. They needed master of ceremonies, or MCs, to interact with the crowd, boast about the DJ's skills, and get people moving again. But here's the thing, the MCs didn't just invent their rhyming style out of thin air. When you look at the DNA of the modern rap battle, it traces directly back to ancient African and Afro-American oral traditions. The youth in the Bronx were essentially acting as modern-day Yoruba griots, those traditional West African singers who preserved history while playfully mocking the powerful. They channeled the signifying monkey, a trickster figure from African folklore who uses clever wordplay to outsmart way stronger opponents. They drew heavily on the dozens, an African-American tradition of highly stylized rhythmic insult battles meant to test emotional resilience. They even pulled from jazz's jive scat and the energetic call-and-response techniques of gospel preachers.
Another massive influence? Toasts. These were long, often gritty, narrative poems passed down orally, usually originating in prisons or the military. Just listen to this raw excerpt about the legendary gangster Stagger Lee. Stagger Lee shot Billy. Oh, he shot that poor boy so hard that a bullet went through Billy and broke the bartender's bar. The storytelling, the rhythm, the unflinching depiction of street violence, all of these elements existed deeply in the oral tradition long before the first rap song was ever pressed onto vinyl. The MCs simply took this ancestral lineage, brought it to the parks, and set it to the rhythm of the breakbeat.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next part. Section 3, the physical and visual elements, breakdance and graffiti.
Think about it. When cool DJ Herc isolated the breakbeat, it was the most chaotic, energetic, and rhythmically complex part of the song. Traditional dances simply did not match the intensity of this completely new sound. The breakbeat absolutely necessitated a new, acrobatic, and explosive form of physical expression. We collectively know it today as breakdancing, but the culture actually breaks it down into distinct physical arts: breaking, popping, and locking. B-boying or breaking radically flipped traditional European dance on its head, literally, with moves like the headspin. Instead of a single vertical core, it used every axis of the body, drawing heavy inspiration from Brazilian capoeira, kung fu, and karate. Then you had popping, which utilized pantomime to create sudden robotic illusions, and locking incorporated comic, marionette-like stops on the offbeats. And just to show you how deeply this influenced global pop, it was actually early pop lockers who personally taught Michael Jackson how to do the moonwalk. No kidding.
Finally, we have the visual backdrop to this entire movement, graffiti. Now, it started slightly earlier in the late 60s as a pretty gritty way for Bronx street gangs to mark their territories, or turfs, but it evolved incredibly fast.
By the time it intertwined with the DJ and b-boy culture, it had become a highly complex visual art form. Simple tags evolved into massive, colorful pieces and breathtaking whole trains where artists would paint entire subway cars overnight. It went from being viewed purely as urban vandalism to catching the eye of the high art world. Eventually, it was fully embraced by avant-garde gallery artists in Manhattan, most notably the legendary Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Which brings us to Section 4, Conclusion, a deeply rooted culture.
What we've uncovered today proves that hip-hop is so much more than just the genre of music you hear on the radio. It is this deeply interconnected web of survival, ingenuity, and tradition. DJing necessitated the physical explosion of breakdancing and the vocal hyping of rap. Rap, in turn, resurrected ancient oral traditions and trickster folklore for the modern city. And graffiti provided the massive, colorful visual canvas for this brand new world. Every single element fed into the other, born right out of the socio-economic conditions of New York, yet carrying the cultural DNA of centuries past. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. We started by looking at how pop culture is defined as something fleeting, a short-lived moment. But given its 30-plus-year dominance, its presence in high art, its corporate co-optation, and its deep ancestral roots, is hip-hop even a subculture anymore? Or has it entirely overwritten the rules, becoming the very framework of modern global pop culture itself? I'll let you chew on that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you see.